Hello, welcome to Rappler Talk. I'm Maritime, and joining us is retired Commodore Carlos or Chuck Agustin, former commandant or head of the Philippine Coast Guard. He was also former president of the National Defense College of the Philippines. And there's a string of other positions he has held. Currently, he's chairman of the Maritime Forum as well as president of the Maritime League. Commodore Agustin is well-versed on maritime issues. He was the person responsible for the transfer of the Coast Guard to the Department of Trade at the time in the 1990s, sir?
DOTC.
At DOTC, rather, Department of Transportation. Today, we will be talking about maritime issues, specifically on the West Philippine Sea. Welcome to Rappler Talk, Commodore Agustin. It's very good to have you, the wisdom of the ages.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here.
Sir, maybe we can take off with the ramming of the fishing boat in Recto Bank last month in June. So the Marina has given its report, Coast Guard has given its report, and they call this a very serious marine casualty. So what's the next step, sir, after these reports?
Well, first of all, let me clarify. I don't really know whether the Coast Guard and the Marina joint report was already submitted.
Yes, sir, it was. We have a copy.
Although I read what you printed, what you published, I haven't gotten any comments from any of the agencies regarding that. And well, I think we all know that the initial report that was mentioned by Secretary Del Lorenzana stated that it was actually intentional, and that created quite a stir. But later on, I think the fishermen, when they were interviewed and they gave their testimonies, they reversed their stance. I don't really know what happened. But anyway, I read that article that was published in Rappler 4 days ago, and that was very comprehensive. You did talk to the
22 fishermen.
Yeah, the 22 fishermen, and they gave very detailed commentary as to what happened. And I was trying to really verify if there was any ramming. There was a ramming, but intentional or not, it did not so state in that Rappler item.
Sir, but even if, what is the liability in that kind of situation? Even if it happened, let's say, before, or it weren't this specific accident?
Well, just like any accident on the road or at sea, it's a collision incident, and therefore we'll have to determine who is responsible and who will have to pay for the damages.
Has this happened before, sir? Are you aware? I mean, you've been head of Coast Guard.
Oh, there's so many incidents that were both here and international. Yes.
But like, did it involve a Chinese vessel here? I mean, concerning Philippine boats.
I'm not aware of any fishing boat incident. Well, we know about the incident with Taiwan in the Batanes, wherein there was even shooting, but that was not a ramming or collision incident.
Sir, what can the Coast Guard? What is the role of the Coast Guard? Maybe let's expand the discussion, because I think recently the Coast Guard has been acquiring its vessels, new vessels, but can it patrol the West Philippine Sea? I'm not asking of the patrolling the entire coastline, but at least the West Philippine Sea.
The entire coastline is within the jurisdiction of both the Philippine Coast Guard and the Philippine Navy. But the Coast Guard, being the Coast Guard per se, is really responsible for implementing our maritime laws and regulations in the Philippines. But the mandate of the Navy also includes being an agency responsible for patrolling our territory. Now, you mentioned about Marina and the Coast Guard. There are two aspects under the IMO rules. There is the flag state, and there is the port state. The flag state is the agency, the agency responsible for registration and for the actuations of our ships internationally. In other words, if a Philippine flag vessel is in a foreign country, it's under the jurisdiction of the flag state, which is the flag state administration, which is Marina. But in case all ships, international and local, are here in Philippine waters, it's under the jurisdiction of the Philippine Coast Guard, which is the port state, responsible for operations, their actuations here while in our territory.
I see. So, earlier you said, sir, that the Philippine Coast Guard is in charge of patrolling our
Yes.
coastline. How come the Navy is still doing that?
It is also part of their function under the law. When the Coast Guard was still part of the Navy, both the Navy and the Coast Guard proper were doing that under their mandate. But specifically, the Coast Guard is tasked for commercial shipping and marine environmental protection. But we cannot deprive the Navy of the responsibility of doing that. It's also part of their mandate.
So, do they coordinate?
Yes, of
The
course.
Navy and Coast Guard coordinate in patrolling our coastline?
There is always coordination, yes.
Because, for example, in the case of Gemver, the fishing boat, it was the Navy that brought them back to Mindoro.
Yes. That certainly took a long time.
So I thought that it was the duty of the Coast Guard to do that.
It's both.
It can be confusing, sir.
Well, we don't have enough. We don't have sufficient resources.
Okay.
Even in the U.S., if something like that happens, the U.S. Navy will also take action to bring them back. The U.S. Navy will never enforce maritime law. Unlike here in the Philippines, we do that. The Navy does that. The U.S. Navy never does that. They don't operate that way. They just watch and monitor and report to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard call the Coast Guard to come over and do their thing. They have a lot of resources and
I see.
aircraft, patrol vessels, support ships.
That's interesting, sir. So, in the future, if our Coast Guard is more equipped, then it can work that way, that the Navy will do the monitoring and then report it to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard enforces.
Both of them do the monitoring. But we're talking about the U.S. Navy case.
Yes.
In the U.S. Navy, both of them do the monitoring, but the U.S. Navy will not take action. They will call the Coast
Yes.
Guard. Here in
Correct.
the Philippines, both of them take action if necessary. But if there's a Coast Guard vessel nearby, then it will be the Coast Guard vessel that will take action.
So, sir, kailangan pala close coordination.
Exactly, yes.
Because the Navy has always been the dominant, in our mindset, sir,
That's right.
we think that the Navy is there to protect the seas. But at the back of our minds pala, the Coast Guard is just there, but shouldn't it be the more active one? But
Well, let's look at it this way, and this is how we justified to Congress why we should separate the Coast Guard from the Navy. The Navy exists actually to fight the enemy, in other words, destroy the enemy and fight the enemy. The Coast Guard exists to save lives and protect the environment.
so the enemy, meaning an external enemy.
Yes.
I see.
It means military action or war. That's the part of the Navy. Active defense of the Philippine territory.
So, sir, you were commandant of the Coast Guard 1990 to 1993.
Yes.
Now, it's 2019. It's been 2 decades na ba, sir? So, can you assess how the Coast Guard has improved? I mean, you still are in touch with the Coast Guard.
Yeah, in my opinion, the separation of the Coast Guard has really enabled them to develop faster. that was one of the main justifications we had. It was President Ramos who did that. President Ramos who separated the Coast Guard from the Navy, and the law in 2009 followed.
But the law,
They get
yes.
more support now. One reason also was that as a military arm, it could not get military aid from the U.S. It could not. Many countries would not want to sell arms, and as a so-called civilian service, not under the Department of Defense, that they were free to sell or to give to the Coast Guard. That's why they have more vessels now than before.
And Japan has been
Very supportive, yes.
supportive of the Coast Guard.
Japan. I was really surprised that shortly after the Scarborough incident,
In 2012, sir?
2012, the Japanese had already sent a delegation here to see what they can do to help the Philippine Coast Guard. Within about 3 to 4 months.
So during your time, sir, there was no support from other, at the time, 1990?
Well, we were part of the Navy.
Of the Navy at the time,
and we only got what the Navy would give to the Coast Guard.
Yes, sir. Sir, going back to Genver, the reports say, and these are authoritative reports, that Chinese vessel that rammed Genver was a paramilitary vessel. Sir, in all your years observing West Philippine Sea and all your readings, sir, has this been going on for a long time?
Well, the idea of using paramilitary vessels only started after the Scarborough incident, or maybe just shortly before.
I see.
And the China Coast Guard actually only started after that incident.
Yeah, please
Very,
talk to
very
us, sir, about that. Yeah, I've read
Yes.
about the recent formation of the China Coast Guard.
Yes. Well, it was formed recently as a result of maybe they had it planned for a long time, and you know, it's also something when the Coast Guard was separated from the Navy, a lot of countries started looking at that. Malaysia, for instance, then the Japan Maritime Safety Agency, which was essentially the Coast Guard, converted itself into a Coast Guard already after that. Before it was called the Japan Maritime Safety Agency. And of course, the Chinese followed suit, and this is where the idea of paramilitary came about. They decided to deputize their fishermen to be paramilitary or supportive of the China Coast Guard.
So it's like, sir, parang kumbaga sa land, kafgu.
Something like that, yes.
I mean, who provides the arms? It's the state, hindi ho ba? To the
Actually,
paramilitary.
those are from the provinces, but supported by the PLA Navy.
Yes.
They're actually the paramilitary forces are under the provinces, like mostly Hainan, because they consider the area here, the West Philippine Sea, as part of the Hainan province.
Yes, I see. So, sir, is the China Coast Guard the only one that has this paramilitary unit? Because, of course, the Philippines doesn't have, Japan doesn't have, sir, di ba? At least in Asia.
The Philippine Coast Guard likes to call it the Coast Guard Auxiliary, but
We do have a
but
Coast Guard auxiliary.
we started that a long time ago, but that is primarily for life-saving only, safety of life at sea or search and rescue.
So we do have those, sir.
Oh yes, that's been here since the 1970s.
Never heard so.
Oh, they're high profile. The Coast Guard Auxiliary, they're divided into several squadrons nationwide.
And
and
they
under
report
the
to the Coast Guard.
Coast Guard District, yes.
I see. So the purpose is really to
Search
save.
and rescue.
Oh, okay.
Well,
but
using...
they're not armed, sir.
They're not armed. But using such things as that has been international. They have, in the U.S., they call it the Lifeboat Association. They are association of, in the local level, that are really dedicated to help distressed vessels at sea. In Europe, what they called Coast Guard were primarily for life-saving purposes also. In the United Kingdom, for instance, they even have maritime rescue coordinating centers that are manned by what they call Coast Guard, and they do life-saving.
So, sir, in Asia, is the Philippines the oldest Coast Guard, or maybe Southeast Asia? Oldest? Kasi, sir, China only came about.
Normally, most countries have what they call marine police. In Malaysia, for instance, they have marine police, and they perform the work of law enforcement at sea. But maritime safety, insofar as maritime safety is concerned, it's only now that many countries are following the U.S. Coast Guard model.
I see.
But Japan, Japan and Indonesia have been very active before. Their Coast Guard, which was called DGSC in Indonesia before, Directorate General for Sea Communication, had been a very good partner of ours in search and rescue and marine pollution.
Sir, Indonesia sees itself as a maritime power.
Yes, indeed it is.
It is. Sir, how about the Philippines? Aren't we a maritime power as well?
Well, we like to think of ourselves that way.
But we're not yet there.
We're not yet there, primarily because of lack of resources. When the Senate decided not to extend the U.S. bases, particularly Subic for the Navy, they did not see to it that the modernization was supported. We wanted the modernization. They declared it, but it was not supported. Well, primarily because of lack of funds, I suppose. But still, we feel that that money went somewhere else. For instance, the income from the gas, our gas
Malampaya?
in Malampaya, the law somehow could support modernization of the Navy and the Coast Guard, but nothing much was spent. Instead, a lot of money went to what you call PDAP.
Yes. So, sir, you must have experienced this, that the public, many Filipinos have low maritime awareness. We think
true.
in terms of land. Even our policy, insurgency, it's to beef up the army, sir. So, why do we have a very low awareness of our maritime surroundings?
I suppose other priorities are given more emphasis. It happens in all countries. If you see many articles or in other countries blaming their own government for failing to give priority to the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and in our case, the idea of lack of interest in our maritime domain has been mentioned many times in many fora. The one who always mentioned this was the late Senator Leti Sihani.
Yes, I remember. Yes.
By the way, Leti Sihani, I remember her for orchestrating a document which is actually to give awareness on the West Philippine Sea, and this was prior to the Scarborough incident.
Wow,
So
what happened?
she
sir?
convened. We completed it. There were about 13 or 14 members of that.
And you
headed
published
by.
the recommendations?
Oh yes, that was published. It's on many websites.
I see.
And of course, it probably needs a little updating now. J. Batong Bakal, Professor J. Batong Bakal and Dr. Eileen Baviera were the ones who did much of the work there.
So primarily, sir, if you can just name maybe a top recommendation, if you recall, from that.
Oh, no, not recommendation. It was a primer.
I see.
I think what we lack a lot of information dissemination regarding this. We had it covered in several websites. It's in the Maritime League website, www.maritimereview.ph.
Maritimereview.ph.
That's in our magazine. The IMOA website, the Institute for Maritime
and Ocean Affairs.
Yes. And the website of UP IMLOS of J. Badamagal.
Yes, sir.
And another organization of Dr. Baviera. Yes.
Pathways is her think tank.
Pathway to Progress.
Yes, sir. So, even in the armed forces, sir, we've never had a Navy Chief of Staff except maybe General Biazon for 2 months.
3 months.
3 months.
And he was, and of course, he is Marine.
Yes. So, this is also, sir, a result of the lack of the low priority given to our maritime surroundings?
Well, I can understand that the priority was to combat insurgency, and that is a land problem. You need more seasoned army officers to handle that. But it's also possible to have. We've had several Air Force chiefs of staff, starting from the 50s and 60s.
Oh, okay.
Then we had the last Air Force chief of staff, I think, was General Asidera. Or maybe
Sir, wala pang Navy eh. Susunod na kaya?
Of course. None. Before, when I was a young officer, there was a Navy flag officer in command who was very high on the list, but nevertheless he did not get it, and I think he's also not so interested to get it. The late Commodore Jose Francisco. The Bonifacio Naval Station is named after him.
Oh, I see. Okay, sir. Sir, now I understand you hold a monthly maritime forum.
Yes.
And
that's one of the activities of the Maritime League. We have a maritime forum, and we publish the Maritime Review magazine.
And we can access this online, the Maritime Review magazine.
Oh yes, www.maritimereview.ph.
Okay.
Yes.
And among the issues that you discuss in this monthly forum, I think you've been discussing West Philippine Sea.
Yes, always. Updates on the West Philippine Sea is always on the agenda. Yes.
And also you talk about Navy and the role of the Coast Guard.
Yes.
And there is no clash pala, there is no conflict, they can work together.
They certainly can, yes.
I see. Also because Coast Guard lacks resources, and Navy has more.
The Navy is bigger in terms of strength and number of vessels. Yes.
Sir, are the Coast Guards of the Philippines and China, I think you mentioned this, coordinating as well, in the West Philippine Sea?
Yes.
How do they do this?
They have well, there's an international forum. There's an ASEAN Chiefs of Coast Guards forum, as well as a ASEAN Chiefs of Navies forum, and they have this expanded also to include China. It's ASEAN +3, China, Japan, and Korea. Yes, but in addition, we have the ASEAN Regional Forum (ARF), consisting of about 25 member countries, all supportive of ASEAN. But the problem is they're only talk, no action. But to talk is better. We must continue talking.
So there's confidence building between and among these Coast Guards.
Coast Guards and navies and governments, actually.
But specifically between China and the Philippines, sir, you know that they are
Yes,
having...
as we speak, as we are speaking now today, the there is a bilateral fisheries talks in Beijing because the Commodore Gongona, who is the
Head of
Undersecretary and Director of
PFAR.
PFAR, is there now. He just arrived this morning. Yes.
Sir, what's up in the agenda of this bilateral?
I was asking, but he didn't tell me. He didn't tell me.
Because there's also conflict.
I suppose all of these meetings, they have an ongoing agenda which they prepare well in advance. So if ever they will talk about the Red Bank 22, it will just be added maybe in an impromptu discussion. Yes.
Sir, but you are confident that the Coast Guard will step up, our Coast Guard will step up and be able to, sir, be more effective in patrolling our coastline.
Actually, they proved themselves during the Marawi siege. They controlled the lake area, and they got a lot of praises from President Duterte in that action.
Sir, on that note, on that hopeful note about the Philippine Coast Guard and its role in patrolling not only the West Philippine Sea but our entire coastline, we will end the interview, but we will keep in touch, sir, with you on updates on maritime issues.
Yes,
so
thank
thank you to our listeners and viewers, and we cannot emphasize more the importance of watching maritime issues, especially in fisheries, in patrolling the West Philippines, as well as the entire Philippine coastline. Remember that the Philippines is one of the top 10 countries in the world with the longest coastline. So keep watching Rappler Talk, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.